Okay guys, welcome back to the Donovan Kid YouTube channel. I'm in my dorm room in Chicago. First time I've made a YouTube video in here, so I feel a little bit weird. I have this microphone that I'm borrowing from one of my roommates. Shout out Koji. And this is my video about ranking all of the live action Batmans that have ever come out. Because the new film, The Batman, is about to come out, so I figured I should probably try making videos about relevant topics and see if that affects my, success rate on YouTube. Because in the past, I've kind of just been winging it, and as you can see, I don't have that many subscribers. So in this video, I'm going to be ranking all of the live action Batman movies. I would include the animated ones, but there's just so many of them that it's hard to keep track of, and I haven't seen all of them, and I wasn't going to watch all of them for this video. Maybe next time, when the next Batman movie comes out, I will have seen every single movie with anything even like tangentially Batman related, and it can be 3 hours long. But this is not going to be that. So I will instead be ranking the 9 live action Batman films that have come out. And these are only the ones where he's like the main character, so not Justice League, but I am including Batman vs. Superman. So the 9 films I will be ranking in chronological order are Batman, Batman Returns, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, Batman Begins, The Dark Knight Rises, and Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. So let's go ahead and get it started. Number 9, Batman and Robin. 1997. The most interesting part of this movie is the C-plot of Alfred getting a disease and dying, and if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know. Look, I understand there's been a little bit of a movement in recent years to sort of revive this movie, kind of like there has been with the prequels, and people are saying, this movie is silly, which means it's good, actually, but nothing about this works for me at all. I don't mind when movies are over the top, that's actually my favorite thing ever, but I like it when movies are over the top with some level of artistry. This movie looks like shit. The costumes look like shit. The production design looks like shit. The special effects look like shit. I understand that this movie is trying to be silly, and I guess it's true that this movie succeeds at being silly, but you would also hope it's trying to be coherent or entertaining or just anything other than boring and awful, but it doesn't really do that. If the only thing a movie is silly, I tend to think that's not good enough. It's not like I don't like 90s cheesiness. Some of my favorite movies are Con Air and Cliffhanger and Demolition Man, but in all of those movies, the film is taking itself seriously within the context of the universe it's set in. Whereas in this movie, I don't believe that Mr. Freeze actually believes in freezing the entire world. I don't believe that Poison Ivy actually wants to turn the planet into trees or whatever the fuck. And I don't believe that Batman gives a shit about stopping them. It's not a believable movie in general, but I don't think that's a problem because it's not trying to be. The problem I have is that I think the movie is not even believable within its own context. This is easily the worst live-action Batman movie, and I don't think anyone should be surprised that it's in last place. At number 8, I have Batman Forever, 1995. This one is a little bit better. I still have problems with the style and tone, but I generally think that the casting works more. I usually love George Clooney, but I think that Val Kilmer was actually a better choice for both Batman and Bruce Wayne. It's almost impossible to get me to hate Jim Carrey or Tommy Lee Jones, despite how much their plan doesn't make any sense, and really the entire plot concerning the villains is just an absolute fucking mess. I like Nicole Kidman, but fucking hell does her character drag this movie down. People on Twitter love to say things like, maybe Batman should just go to therapy, and to my absolute dismay, this movie actually attempts to answer that question, and good fucking lord is it boring as hell. Their character dynamic is absolutely terrible. In every single scene, Bruce is like, you want to know the real me? As if he hadn't been trauma dumping on her in every scene before that. You're not mysterious anymore, buddy. I also think that Batman Forever generally looks better than Batman and Robin in terms of visual effects, lighting, production design, everything really. But this movie also has the bat nipples on the suit, and it didn't get nearly as much shit for it as Batman and Robin does. I actually don't care about the bat nipples that much, but I will say that in Batman and Robin, the fucking bat credit card make me want to commit not alive. Both Schumacher movies are aimed at a younger audience, and I get that there's people who think that any superhero movie or any Batman movie is just automatically only for kids, and I get why they think that, But with every other director's Batman movies, there are reasons to watch the movie that would actually appeal to people over the age of 10 years old. Well, I guess there is one reason to watch these movies as a grown-up, and that's horny watching. As far as horny watching movies go, you could do a lot worse than these last two movies, but you could also do a lot better. I don't view Batman Forever as a total failure like I do with Batman and Robin, but the plot of both movies just feels haphazardly stitched together to the point that they're barely watchable. At number 7, I have Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. If this movie is in last place for you, I can totally see that. It's way too long, it's way too dark, and the fact that it's trying to be mature and serious when the plot makes just as little sense as the last two movies is arguably even worse. The third act is a complete mess with a generic CGI gray bad guy, and Batman ends up feeling kind of out of place in his own movie by that point. Lex Luthor is still just... I don't even know what they're thinking. I've seen countless people on the internet argue that it's more comic accurate, and I honestly don't think the people who say that even believe it. This movie is trying to juggle like 9 different plot lines, and it does not succeed with any of them. The acting is pretty stiff from almost everyone, but Ben Affleck is a decent Batman, and Jeremy Irons is a good Alfred. The Batsuit looks great. The Batman fight scenes are pretty solid until Doomsday. I also think the score for this film is really cool. I like what Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL did a lot. The cinematography isn't always great, but there are some really iconic images that still stick out in my head. I guess what I'm saying is that there's a lot that's bad about this movie, but there are things to appreciate about it too. I think all 3 movies that I've talked about so far, you could say the same thing in that they have clear director's visions, so that, at least when the directors watch these movies, they'll like them, and that's way more important than if I like them or if anyone else likes them, which I don't. Moving on. At number 6, I have Batman Returns, 1992. Every Batman movie from here on out is pretty good. I go back and forth between this one and the next one, but ultimately one of them had to get kicked out of the top 5, and I'm sorry that it's this one because this movie is generally pretty cool. The villains, Danny DeVito as Penguin and Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman, are so iconic. Both actors absolutely crush it. I love how dark this movie gets, and yet Tim Burton's direction is able to keep it light enough so that it still has a ton of comic booky charm. Michael Keaton is solid in reprising his role, but I always felt like he was kind of a weird choice to play Batman. He's not really intimidating, and he doesn't come across as suave or a genius or like a weirdo billionaire. If you're playing Bruce Wayne, you gotta be at least one of those things. For some reason, Michael Keaton still works somehow. Danny Elfman's score is also great. I think it might be even better in this movie than in the first one. I can see why this is actually some people's favorite Batman movie, but in my mind, there are definitely some clear flaws. I think the plot gets way too bogged down in the politics of everything, and the moving parts don't fit together perfectly all the time, so by the third act, I felt just a little bit bored. I also don't think this movie has quite as many iconic, memorable moments or set pieces as the movies above it do. At number 5, I have The Dark Knight Rises, 2012. Like I said, it was a pretty close call between this and Batman Returns. Like I just mentioned, I think it has better iconic moments, The opening plane heist, the football field being destroyed, the fight scene with Bane on the bridge, the giant ride at the end, climbing out of the whole sewer set piece. A lot of those things are kind of silly, and I think that this movie definitely has a hard time balancing the grand scale it wants to achieve with the dark tone it also wants to achieve. A lot of times it just feels like this movie is in over its head. It's also kind of a problem that the movie peaks within the first 10 minutes. Like, that plane heist is totally the best scene, in my opinion. And I also think it's impossible to talk about this movie without the worst death scene of all time. Fucking hell. And then the third act is just this whole big thing about getting a nuke out of the city. It's just kind of weird. Still, the iconic set pieces, which involved a ton of incredible practical effects, the fantastic score from Hans Zimmer, the performances, other than that death scene, and the exciting IMAX cinematography still make this a pretty good movie, in my opinion. And this is my video. Fuck you. At number 4, we have Batman, 1989. Like I said earlier, I think Michael Keaton is kind of a weird choice to play Batman. I like him better in this movie than I do in Batman Returns, and I think that actually has to do with the character of Vicky Vale. Even though she's kind of just like your typical damsel in distress. She really accentuates the difference between Bruce Wayne and Batman. But you know what casting choice is not weird at all and was absolutely perfect? Jack fucking Nicholson. There have been so many great versions of the Joker, but this one still holds up against all of them, and he's the measuring stick that they're all compared to. Honestly, I don't think we appreciate Jack Nicholson's portrayal enough with how much attention that Heath Ledger and Joaquin Phoenix get. I think he's easily the funniest incarnation of the character among those three. And I also think that the humor in general in this movie is something that's pretty underappreciated. In all of the Marvel movies today, there's this quipping that both the heroes and villains constantly do, and it's just the same type of humor over and over again in every single movie. That's not to say it doesn't work sometimes, because it definitely does. Look, I'm getting off track. The point is that this movie has a very dry sense of humor, but also the jokes that the Joker makes are very different from the jokes that Alfred would make or that Batman would make. Anyway, I think that dry sense of humor is just a perfect compliment for Tim Burton's version of Gotham City. He really leans into the gothic aspect of the city in all of the architecture, and it's just so heavily stylized in the way that you would expect a comic book movie to look like. I also think Danny Elfman's score is another perfect complement to the atmosphere of Gotham here. It's so instantly iconic, and it just makes every moment better. If there's one major criticism I have, it's just that the third act is kind of weak. It feels a little bit rushed, and then Batman just all of a sudden has his Batjet, and Joker all of a sudden is able to put together this giant parade. It's just like a very, oh, well, I guess this is happening now kind of moment, except it's the entire last 20 minutes of the movie. Moving on to number 3, which is Batman Begins, 2005. This movie is exactly what it needed to be. It was the exact opposite of the Batman movie before it, which was Batman and Robin in so many ways. It introduced a new, fresh version of this iconic character and got everyone to buy into him, not just as a character, but as an idea. I honestly tend to have a hard time with origin stories, especially for superheroes. I think they get pretty stale and formulaic. Once you've seen it once, you've seen them all, you know? But I really like how this movie does it. I think this movie has great pacing. It always feels like the plot is just flying along, and it doesn't give you much time to think about some of the goofier aspects of the story. Aesthetically, this movie is great. This version of Gotham is a little bit less Chicago, shout out Chicago, and a little bit more Gotham City. I think all of the Scarecrow effects have aged really well, and Scarecrow as a character plays into the themes of the movie about fear, in an effective way. This movie is everything it needed to be. The movie isn't perfect, but it fulfilled its purpose as perfectly as it could have. Poked his hole in the thing. What? At number 2, we have the OG Batman, 1966. Now, some of you might be a tiny bit mad at me right now. Donovan, you said that Batman and Robin was silly, therefore it's bad. But this movie is silly, and you're saying it's good. Well, basically, yes. I don't know what kind of effect I'm going to do there. Part of it is just that I love Adam West, and I think the casting for the villains is great too. It is incredibly funny that Cesar Romero is playing the Joker, and he's just got this mustache that's painted white over it, and nobody ever questions it. That's great. There's nothing even close to that funny in Batman and Robin. And I haven't even yet mentioned Bat Shark Repellent or the Bang Pow Slam effects. Those are also amazing. How could I possibly give this movie less than an absolute 10 out of 10? I also think that the biggest difference between these movies comes down to the word verisimilitude, and I touched on this earlier about things making sense within the context of the universe that the film takes place in. Verisimilitude is all about suspension of disbelief and how the audience interacts with a movie or a video game or whatever. How does a film set up its rules and then adhere to them later on? With Batman, it sets up very early on how the world of this movie works. The tone, the way people talk and act, and the style of action is all consistent throughout. Nobody's ever poking fun at the ridiculousness of the world. Whereas in Batman and Robin, they're constantly doing that all the time, and the movie is 2 hours long, and it's so annoying. The other thing is Batman and Robin doesn't really break verisimilitude in the traditional way of breaking the rules it sets up. But I think the reason for that is because Batman and Robin was so focused on being a silly, goofy movie that it never bothered to take the time to set up a clear tone or rules. It was just fuck it, we're gonna do whatever for the entire movie because, fuck you, it's a kid's movie. In 60s Batman, it makes total sense that he would have Bat Shark Repellent because that's the kind of world that this movie exists in. In Batman and Robin, nothing makes any sense because there isn't any verisimilitude because the filmmakers were so focused on making a silly movie that they forgot being silly is very serious business. At number 1, we have obviously The Dark Knight, 2008. Although I was just defending it a moment ago, I'll admit that part of my enjoyment of 60s Batman is completely ironic. But even irony cannot conquer The Dark Knight. It's kind of hard to put into words just how much I love this movie. People love to talk about how serious and dark and gritty and realistic it is, and I get that, but this movie isn't really realistic at all. It's actually not too serious either. There are plenty of great jokes in this movie. I mean, I can practically quote the entire script, and there are dozens of bangers from almost every single character. Obviously, you have to talk about Heath Ledger's performance. He is so good. I love him on movies like 10 Things I Hate About You or A Knight's Tale, but he's basically unrecognizable in this. I think it's rare to see somebody so absorbed in a role, and I think that pretentious Kino cinema verite people don't give this performance the credit it actually deserves. I think there are plenty of performances where like Daniel Day-Lewis or Leonardo DiCaprio or whoever get really absorbed in a role, or performances with like Meryl Streep or Viola Davis where they're just emoting perfectly. But I don't know if there's a better example of a performance where the actor just totally transformed into a character where they're completely unrecognizable from any of their previous work in the way that Heath Ledger's performance is. Obviously, the makeup helps with being unrecognizable, and I think that it's comparable to Marlon Brando in The Godfather, who is the other like example of an unrecognizable from his other roles kind of performance, and obviously makeup played a big role there too. So what I'm saying basically is put actors in more makeup more. Thank you. Look, this is a top 5 movie of all time for me, and I could probably talk about it for days, so I'll just say I think that literally everything about it is great. No notes, no half compliments, no nitpicks. Well, no, I'm not gonna. I mean, no, I shouldn't. Unless. So that's going to do it for the rankings. This turned out to be a little bit longer than I thought. I think the new Batman movie looks really good. I'm probably not going to make like an individual video review of it or anything. But yeah, it looks really good, and you'll probably find out what I think of it eventually. Thanks for watching. Great. This is the worst YouTube video I've ever made.